Okay, so now we're going to talk about the categorical imperatives and go over some examples and maybe some objections. All right, so the first categorical imperative is stated as follows: act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can, at the same time, will it become a universal law. So there's a few technical terms in this definition. Here, again, I think I mentioned this last video. When he says maxim, he means rule, but the more complicated technical term here is universal law. So it involves the concept of universalizability, which is what we will primarily be covering this lecture. Okay, so you might be familiar with the golden rule, which is treating others as one wants to be treated. And that's something that is that many religions abide by and teach as a moral principle that most people should follow. And you might think that this one, treating others as one wants to be treated, is very similar to act only according to the maxim through which you can, at the same time, will it become a universal law. Now, saying it the way that Kant says it, you might say there's no real similarities here, but a lot of people within the history of philosophy and other just people who aren't philosophers who have read Kant think that he is putting forth some kind of golden rule. But there's a major difference between these two principles. So let's consider the case of the masochist and the sadist. So a masochist is someone who desires pain, who gets pleasure from pain, and a sadist is someone who desires to inflict pain. They get pleasure from inflicting pain. So when we look at something like the golden rule, which is treat others as you want to be treated, this would imply that the masochist should inflict pain to other people. Why? Because she's treating others how she wants to be treated. She wants to be treated as someone who gets and receives a lot of pain. So she's going to treat others that same way. She's going to inflict a lot of pain on others. Or if she sees others in pain, she's not going to stop that pain from happening because that's how she would want to be treated. Which that seems totally wrong, right? Like most people don't want pain. They don't desire pain. Just because the masochist wants pain, that doesn't seem like a real good reason to treat others that way. So this is a case in which the golden rule leads us very, very astray. Like we should not be using this moral principle to act because it's going to cause a lot of pain for a lot of people. And the sadist is the same the sadist objection is the same kind of objection. The sadist is going to be okay with the infliction of pain because that's what she wants to do. She wants to inflict pain, so she's going to treat others how the way she wants to be treated. So when she sees others inflicting pain, she's not going to stop them from inflicting that pain because she wouldn't want to be stopped when she's inflicting pain because she's a sadist. So this masochist sadist is a huge objection against the golden rule because in many cases, people want to be treated in ways that others don't want to be treated. And it's not morally okay to treat others the way that you might want to be treated when you have unusual preferences. But this is not how Kant's categorical imperative works. So let's talk a little bit about universal law and universalizability. So under Kant's deontology, if a rule is morally right, then everybody should follow that rule when in similar circumstances. So we wouldn't say that about the sadist or the masochist. We wouldn't say that everyone should inflict pain to others as the masochist and the sadist would desire. So, in fact, many of Kant's moral rules, moral maxims require that you don't harm other people. And that's something that everybody should follow when in similar circumstances, including the sadist and the masochist. So let me just review this really quickly. The golden rule would state that the sadist and the masochist should allow pain, should allow other people to experience pain. Why? Because they're doing what they would want. They're allowing others to be treated the way that they want to be treated. Kant's categorical imperative would say that if it's not universalizable to everybody, then it's not a good moral rule. Because the sadists and masochists have these moral rules that allow for pain, and because pain is not universalizable, the sadists and the masochists are not following a good moral rule, that their moral rule should not be a moral rule at all. Okay. So how do we determine these maxims, these moral rules? So first we got to formulate a moral rule that illustrates your reasons. So you got to, again, use that reasoning, that rationality to formulate a moral rule, and you got to align your reasons with that moral rule. Then you have to reformulate the moral rule as a universal law of nature that governs all rational agents, so that holding that all must by natural law act as you yourself propose to act in these circumstances. So that's that universalizable clause, is basically just reformulate the rule so that it applies to everybody. So you might have a rule like, I shouldn't lie to my friends. That would be the first moral rule, and you can illustrate how it aligns with your reasons by saying, lying harms people, and I wouldn't want to be harmed, and there's a host of other reasons why you might think that lying is not good. Then you have to reformulate that so that it's a universal law. So you say that, okay, not that I shouldn't lie to my friends, but no one ever should lie to their friends. So everybody who is a rational agent, everybody who can reason, who can use rationality, all of these people should abide by this rule: never lie to your friends. So nobody should ever lie to their friends. So that's 1 and 2. Now 3, consider whether your maxim is even conceivable in a world governed by this law of nature. And 4, ask yourself whether you would or could rationally will to act on your rule in such a world. So these 2 are the application of universalizability. 3 is creating your moral rule as a universal rule, and then 2 is, and then 3 and 4 are the application of that universal rule. So let's go back to this cheating friends case. So 1 is, so again, so formulate your moral rule as it illustrates the reasoning. So 1 is to tell friend 1 the truth about friend 2's affair. So that's the principle that you want to act on. 2 is universalize that rule, make that rule universal. So everyone should always tell their friends the truth and never lie to their friends. So that's a more universal, abstract, objective rule. So the first one is that practical rule that you want to apply to your very own example, your very own circumstance. And 2 is extending that rule to apply to everyone who is in similar circumstances. So how do we do 3 and 4? So 3 again was consider whether your maxim is even conceivable in a world governed by this law of nature. And then 4 is ask yourself whether you would or could rationally will to act on this rule in such a world. So how do we do that? So first we have to understand, what do we mean by conceivable? So consider whether your maxim is even conceivable in a world governed by this law of nature. So what is conceivability? So what does this step entail? To conceive something, at the very least, that something must not be a contradiction. Now, what's a contradiction? I am certain that you've all heard, excuse me. I am sure that you all have heard the word contradiction before, and you have probably used the word contradiction before, but I am also highly confident that you have not used it in the philosophically robust way that I'm about to present it. And this is coming from just logic. So if you take a logic class, you're going to learn all about contradictions in a much more rigorous manner, but I'm going to give you a very baby logic version of contradictions. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about inconsistencies. I think they're in week 1. And I said, I talked about giving the example of your beliefs that are inconsistent. But I never give you a formal definition of inconsistency. And so here's a formal definition. 2 statements that are inconsistent means that both can be false at the same time, but only one can be true at the same time. And I told you guys to give me examples of your inconsistent beliefs. But here I'm going to talk about another example. So suppose that you believe that you must always listen to your boss. One day he asks you to do something that will harm another employee. But you also believe that you shouldn't harm others. So now you have a pair of inconsistent beliefs. Your first belief, you must always listen to your boss, is inconsistent with your belief that you shouldn't harm other people. Now, both of these beliefs could be false. So it could be false that you must always listen to your boss, and it could also be false that you shouldn't harm other people. But importantly, both cannot be true at the same time. So if it is true that you must always listen to your boss, then it has to be false that you shouldn't harm other people. But if it is true that you shouldn't harm other people, then it has to be false that you should always listen to your boss. So let's spell this out a little bit more. these inconsistent statements. You must always listen to your boss, and you should never harm other people. If you believe that you must always listen to your boss, then you must harm your fellow employee. Why? Because that's part of the story. It says one day he asked you to do something that will harm another employee. If you believe that you must always listen to your boss, if that is true, then you have to harm your other employee. But if you believe that it is true that you should never harm other people, then you have to reject the belief that you must always listen to your boss. You must always listen to your boss must be false. Because if you should never harm other people and your boss is telling you to harm another employee, then listening to your boss would be the wrong thing to do. It would be false to abide by that belief. So what ends up happening is that you must always listen to your boss, and it's not the case that you must always listen to your boss. And to present this in formal logic, it creates this P and not P. So this is a logical symbol for P, but I'm just going to put not P. Or you end up with this contradiction. You should never harm other people, and it is not the case that you should never harm other people. And that's in its logical form, Q and not Q. Where Q is just standing for the sentence, and P is just standing for that sentence. So you must always listen to your boss. I'm going to abstract away from my semantics and get this variable P. And it's not the case that you must always listen to your boss. So, and not P. You should never harm other people, Q. And it's not the case that you should never harm other people, not Q. So inconsistent statements end up producing contradictions. And these are the contradictions, P and not P, Q and not Q. So it's a statement and it's direct negation. It is Wednesday and it is not Wednesday. That is a contradiction. Now, you might think, aren't contradictions the same thing as inconsistencies? But they're not, because notice I said that it could be true that one of these, or that both of them are both false. So both statements are false. That's possible with an inconsistent set of statements. But that is not possible with a contradictory set of statements. So again, contradictions are P and not P, a statement and its negation. With a contradiction, one must be false and the other must be true, or vice versa. So it's not possible for both to be false. It is Wednesday and it is not Wednesday. Is it possible for both of those to be false? Let me type that out for you guys. It is Wednesday and it is not Wednesday. Now, it's possible that it is Wednesday is true, but that necessarily makes that it is not Wednesday false. Now, it's possible that it is Wednesday is false, but that necessarily makes that it is not Wednesday true. So if one is true, the other one has to be false, and if one is false, the other one has to be true. It's not possible for both to be false, and it's not possible for both to be true. Again, just to drill this point through, inconsistencies, it is possible for both to be false. It's just not possible for both to be true. Contradictions, it's not possible for both to be true, and it's not possible for both to be false. One is necessarily false when the other is true, and one is necessarily true when the other is false. So what does this have to do with Kant? And what does this have to do with ethics? And what does this have to do with his deontology? What Kant is saying is that whatever maxim you are universalizing, you cannot produce a contradiction. So let's go back to our main example, never lie to friends. If you universalize this, so if you can conceive of a world where this is a real maxim, where this is something that everybody in similar circumstances must abide by, does it produce any such contradiction? If it does, then it's not a good maxim, and it can't be a moral rule that we abide by, that we say everybody should abide by. But if it doesn't produce a contradiction, then it passes these final two steps of the process. So let's spell this out a little bit further. So never lie to friends. This is the maxim we're reasoning about right now. We're trying to universalize it. So the reason why never lie to friends is a moral maxim It's not because lying is inherently immoral or that not lying is inherently moral, even though that's probably what we're all thinking now, right? Before reading Kant, you probably thought lying is bad, not lying is good, and that's why we should make these the moral rules of a society. Because lying is a bad thing, not lying is a good thing, and we want moral rules to illustrate the good things, and we want moral rules to eliminate the bad things. But that's not Kant's point. He's not even thinking about whether lying is good or lying is bad. All he's thinking about is contradictions. He's thinking about logic. He's thinking about the reasoning. He's thinking about the rationale. The problem is that when we universalize lying, we run into a contradiction. So let's spell this out. Suppose it's okay to lie to friends or universal. So this is the negation of the principle that we actually have. So never lie to friends. Now let's think of that negation. Never lie to friends. What's the opposite of that? It's not the case to never lie to friends. So what does that mean? And just without using this long, it's not the case negation, that it is okay to lie to friends. So let's imagine that it is okay to lie to friends. Let's universalize that. Let's say that everybody everywhere in all the similar circumstances should lie to their friends. They're morally obligated to lie to their friends. So in other words, what would the world be like if everyone always lied to each other? What does that world look like? Can we conceive of that world? And if it turns out that it's a contradiction, that it produces a contradiction, this world in which everybody's always lying to each other, then that universalizable process has shown us that we can't even conceive of a world in which this is a moral principle. Why? Because such a world contains a contradiction. You can't conceive of contradiction being true. And that's something I should have stressed earlier. Contradictions are always necessarily false. If I said to you today, right now, it is Wednesday and it is not Wednesday, you know I'm saying something false because it is impossible for it to be both Wednesday and not Wednesday. If I said, I am in Las Cruces and I am not in Las Cruces, that is impossible. That is necessarily false. It is impossible. Can you even conceive of me being in Las Cruces and at the very same time not being in Las Cruces? You can't conceive of that. Can you conceive of it being Wednesday and it not being Wednesday? You cannot conceive of that. It is necessarily inconceivable and it's necessarily false. So going back to this example, let's try our best to conceive of a world in which everyone always lied to each other. If this were universal, if everyone always lied to each other, then everybody could lie to each other. So it's possible to lie to each other. And if everybody lied to each other, then no one would ever know if anybody were telling the truth. So I'm going to spell this out even further. Suppose in this world where everybody's lying to each other, you ask your friend, is it sunny outside? And then they say, no, it's raining, even though it is in fact sunny. So they're lying to you. The very next day, you ask another friend. Again, it's sunny, but they say, no, it's snowing. So they lie to you again. And this goes on day after day after day. Every single time you ask someone a question, they lie to you about it. Pretty soon, you're just going to stop believing what other people say. Like, so if you say, is it sunny outside? And they say, no, it's raining. Then you go outside and it's sunny. The next time you talk to that person, are you going to believe what they say? Like, rationally, you shouldn't, right? I'm sure a lot of you have had friends who just are perpetual liars. Like, they just lie about every mundane little thing and for seemingly no reason. Eventually, you just stop believing that friend when they tell you their stories because you know, like, oh, Fred's a liar. So obviously I'm not going to listen to Fred because he's lied to me every single time I talk to him. So of course he's lying to me right now when he's telling me his story. So this is what's going on in this situation. Pretty soon, everybody around you is lying, you're just going to stop believing what everybody around you says. And so this is the kicker. This is what's important. If everyone lies all the time, pretty soon people are going to stop believing anyone. And if no one believes anyone else, it's impossible to lie. In order for a lie to work, you must deceive someone into believing something that is false. And if no one believes anything that anyone else says, then you can no longer deceive someone into believing that something is false, since they wouldn't believe anything you say to begin with. So universalizing the principle of lying, of allowing lying, creates this contradiction in the world that everybody should always lie. And it is not the case that everybody should always lie, because in this world where everybody's lying, it's not even possible to lie anymore. So how can we put forth, universalize this principle that everybody should lie if it's not even possible to lie in such a world? And that's the contradiction. That's the P and not P that Kant was worried about. So we have these two maxims: never lie to your friends, P, and always lie to your friends, not P. So if P is true, then not P is false. And if not P is false, then P is true. And we just proved that not P, always lie to your friends, is false. How did we prove that? Because we universalized it. We saw that it created a contradiction in this world. And because we know that contradictions are necessarily false, we know that not P is false. Also, in virtue of the principle of contradiction, if not P is false, then P has to be true. So if we universalize 2 and it creates a contradiction, 2 must be false. And since 1 is the negation of 2, 1 has to be true. And so the whole entire ethical framework, ethical picture, deontology involves not morality, but logic, whether or not contradictions arise from the moral principles that we're putting forward. And so that's where he's getting our morality. It's not from God. It's not from happiness. It's not from some assumption that that harming people is bad because we think it feels bad when we're harmed. No, it's all about whether or not the moral principle, the moral rule, the moral norm that you are putting forward creates a contradiction when universalized to everybody. And that's his ethical framework. And I wish you guys knew how lucky you were that I did not assign actual original text from Kant, because to terse out this lecture, it just from Kant, it took so much work. So I could not imagine being a first-year philosophy student and trying to read Kant. It just seems ridiculous. Now, that is not to say that you shouldn't read Kant later on. Like, I read Kant all the time. He's a prime figure in my dissertation, so I'm very familiar with Kant, and it's not fun. And still, to this day, after 10 years of doing philosophy, it is not fun to read Kant. But he is just such an influential figure, and the very fact that this is a whole renovation of morality. This is just not looking at morality from the point of view of whether things are morally good or bad, but looking at morality from the point of view of logic and the principle of contradiction, which is it just seems so necessary that contradictions are false. And if you're grounding your ethical framework in logic, in this principle of contradiction, that necessarily the contradictions are false, then it seems like you have a very strong grounding of your ethical framework. Okay, so now let's talk briefly about the second categorical imperative, which, quote from Kant, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. So again, we got some technical terms in this definition, some terms that you might not be familiar with. And here I have person. And you might think, duh, I know what a person is. But person is actually a highly philosophical term, concept. And we're going to have a whole week on that in a couple weeks about what a person is. But for Kant, a person is a rational agent, an individual capable of reasoning and acting on those reasons. So persons are not synonymous with human being for Kant. No, not at all. Because there are tons of human beings who aren't going to be persons under his account. There are tons of human beings who are not rational at all, that they're incapable of reasoning, like babies, the severely mentally disabled, the demented grandmothers and grandfathers in the world. They can't reason anymore. They lost that cognitive functioning. The children have yet to gain that cognitive functioning. And then there's the severely mentally disabled. They're adult human beings who just cannot mentally reason. Like the severely autistic, they behave as they're children. They can't use language. They can't formulate any kind of moral principles and reason about it and act in accordance with those reasons. And that's what Kant needs in order for you to be treated as a person. And we can think of it this way too. Like if aliens exist and they're super highly technologically advanced, they're way further civilized than us human beings are, they would be persons under Kant's view. They would be rational agents. They'd be individuals capable of reasoning and acting from those reasons. So again, you have humans that are not persons, and then you have non-humans who are persons. So person is not at all synonymous with human being. And that's not only on Kant's view, but in a wide range of philosophical issues and topics. Persons is a highly, highly controversial and specific term used for a specific population of individuals, and it's not at all necessarily tied to Homo sapien, human being. But again, we're going to talk a lot more about this in a couple weeks. Okay, so merely as a means, where he says here, never merely as a means to an end, but always at an end at the same time. Merely as a means basically means don't use other people. So never treat other people as an object to be used, and that includes yourself. So don't use yourself as like an instrument or an object. You have to have intrinsic value. And so that's the very end of this imperative, which is so never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. So what does it mean to be as an end? It means to treat yourself with intrinsic value. And that's another term that needs unpacking. So what is intrinsic value? It is often contrasted with extrinsic value or instrumental value. Intrinsic value. So intrinsic versus extrinsic, both of these are measures of worth, of value. So intrinsic value is valuable in itself, whereas extrinsic valuable or instrumental value is valuable insofar as it gets us to those intrinsic values. So an example is humans are often thought to be valuable for their own sake. We don't need anything outside and above ourselves to have value. If you were existing and then you woke up one day and nothing else existed in the world, like all the plants are gone, all the trees are gone, earth was gone, and you're just sitting here in some void, some like objectless void, you would still have value. You would still be intrinsically valued. Your value is not determined by anything outside of yourself. Here's another, again, look at me, giving you concrete examples after presenting a theoretical definition, and I'm doing it again here. And here's my example of extrinsic or instrumental value. Cell phones are extrinsically valuable, or they're instrumentally valuable. They're valuable only insofar as we humans can use them. If we did not exist, cell phones would not have any value whatsoever. So one day, I guess we wouldn't wake up. If one day all the humans, everything on Earth disappeared, and the only thing floating in that objectless void was a cell phone, that cell phone would have no value whatsoever. Or even just, we don't have to take it that far. If your cell phone here just all of a sudden broke one day, its value, it has no value whatsoever. It might have some monetary value, some money, but money is also just intrinsically valuable. It's only valuable in so much as you can use it to buy goods and services. If our currency fell apart completely, which it has before in the past in previous civilizations, the currency just totally falls apart. It no longer has any value anymore. It's like pieces of paper. If our dollar fell apart, you can just rip up your dollar bills because they're not going to have any more value anymore because they are only intrinsically valuable or instrumentally valuable. They are not valuable in and of themselves. So under a utilitarianist framework, happiness is what has intrinsic value. Happiness is valuable in and of itself for its own sake. Your intentions or your character or goodwill only has extrinsic value under a utilitarianist framework. Intentions, character, goodwill, they're only valuable insofar as it can produce happiness, produce this intrinsic good. Now, under the deontology view, under Kant's view, duty and persons have intrinsic value. They're valuable in itself for their own sake. Happiness has only extrinsic value. It's only valuable insofar as it increases our goodwill, our intention to follow the moral duties. So happiness is not something that is valuable in and of itself under the deontological view. It's only valuable as an instrument to bring about the intrinsic values, the intrinsic goods, which is duty and persons. And importantly here for the second categorical imperative, which I kind of brushed over, but it's very important, is this: don't use other people, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never admired as a means, but to an end, but as an end at the same time. That means yourself too. So you shouldn't use yourself. Like it's a categorical imperative, which means that it's a necessary universal command that you don't use yourself, that you don't treat yourself as instrumentally valuable, that you treat yourself as intrinsically valuable, as having valuable in and of itself without any kind of outside influence at all. But also other persons, other rational beings, other beings capable of reason. Okay, so I breezed over that quickly. Kant is one of the most difficult philosophers to read, but also to teach and also to learn. And there's so much that I've left out in Kant, but I mean, this is an intro class, so if you're interested in Kant, if you're interested in utilitarian, you got to take ethical theory. I think JP Vessel is still teaching it, and he's awesome, and I would highly recommend taking one of his classes. But if he's not teaching it, I'm sure someone else in the department will do a great job teaching ethical theory. But also applied ethics, environmental ethics, I think used to be on the course catalog. Kant is he's a prime mover in the environmental ethics field. I'm in environmental ethics. I'm in non-human animal ethics, non-human animal cognition. And that's why I'm saying Kant's all over my dissertation, because his view, his dependence on rationality and reason is something that in animal ethics you have to argue against, you have to object against. And here are some objections and problems with his view. I'll save the universalizable one for the end, but let's talk about means and ends. Under Kant's view, according to the second categorical imperative, sure, never use other persons. Always treat other persons as having intrinsic value. But animals, non-rational humans, they can be treated as means and not ends. You can use animals for whatever you want. You can use other humans for however you want. So it allows us to treat other animals as perhaps not in very morally questionable ways, but not only other animals, but babies and this severely mentally disabled or your demented grandma and grandpa. You can use them as mere means, and they are no longer intrinsically valuable. They lose their valuable the second you walk out of the room. They lose their value. And so this seems extremely morally problematic. Again, we're going to talk about this more in depth in a couple weeks, but Kant tries to get out of this. He says that you can't, if you just use animals ever you want and you treat them cruelly, you're going to develop a really ill will. So your character is going to be flawed because you'll be treating these animals so horribly. And then when you come across a person, someone who needs to be treated as intrinsically valuable, because you have this habit of treating animals as extrinsically valuable, as having no value, you might accidentally treat humans, or not humans, other persons, as extrinsically valuable. And that would be super problematic for Kant's view. So again, the only reason for Kant to treat animals decently as morally valuable individuals is only insofar as it's going to help you treat other persons as intrinsically valuable. And not just animals, like this is going to affect these marginal, as it's called in the philosophical discourse, cases, these human beings, marginal cases, these cases of humans who don't have rational faculties, cannot reason, cannot use their rationality to act in accordance with the moral principles of society. They too can be treated in very morally questionable ways, unless you also accept Kant's principle that no, you should treat them good because you don't want to develop bad habits for when you do end up running into persons. Which, sure, a lot of people might say, fine, you can treat animals however you want. Like I mentioned a couple lectures ago, like there's this view in religion that humans have dominion over animals and therefore we can treat them however we want. But what about other human beings? What about these marginal case human beings, these babies? Like, I think there's a strong moral intuition that we ought to treat babies with some kind of moral respect and moral integrity. But what's your principle guiding that behavior? Just because they're cute? Just because they're innocent? What's the reason for treating babies differently than you do animals? Just because they're human beings? Now, that's a view we're going to talk about in a couple weeks too, called speciesist, which is a variant of like racism or sexism or ableism, where it's like the only defensible way to justify racism is just because someone is not the same skin color as you, they deserve to be treated worse. That seems morally indefensible, and that doesn't even seem rationally justified. So to extend that to animals, to treat other animals as somehow morally beneath you, simply in virtue because they are not the same species as you, is just as bad as racism, according to some views. So you need some other kind of philosophical principle in order to justify the difference in treatment you have towards babies and the difference of treatment you have towards animals, or the difference of treatment you have towards severely disabled humans and the difference you have towards animals. It seems like under Kant's view, the severely disabled humans, the babies, the animals, they all can be treated the same way, and they all can be treated much worse than persons, these rational agents. And that seems morally indefensible. And then there are these cases of non-rational humans who seem to lack reason, who seem to lack rationality. So they're not severely cognitively disabled, they're not babies, they don't have dementia, they're not animals, and yet they seem incapable of reasoning properly. They seem incapable of rationality. What are we supposed to do with them? That opens up a whole other can of worms for Kant's view. But there are other problems with this view, and that has to do with this universalizability principle. So what happens when two maxims conflict with one another? So we have this maxim, never to lie, don't lie to your friends, never lie to others. Then we have these other maxims like never harming others. And this is going to be the discussion question for this week, which is this Nazi example. And I'll say it right now, but of course I'll type it up and give it to you in your assignments. So suppose that you're living in Nazi Germany, and I'm not sure if you learned a lot about Nazi Germany in high school, or if your high school education about Nazi Germany was accurate or sufficient, but during that time, a lot of the non-Jewish German individuals did not take a stand against Nazis. Why? Because it was incredibly dangerous to do so. They kind of just went with the status quo. They didn't question the norms. They just let the Nazis do what they wanted, and they didn't stand up for the Jews. That's why we learned a lot about these people who did stand up for the Jews, because those people were few and far between. They were risking a lot in order to help the Jews, but a vast majority of the German population either turned a blind eye, even though they might have thought it was questionable behavior, or they were okay with it. They just was like, they had no problem with what the Nazis were doing. But suppose you're German living in this society and you have Jewish friends, but you also have Nazi friends. And these were your friends before Hitler came to power. So you knew these people for quite some time before anything seriously morally corrupt started occurring. Suppose one day things start getting hot with the Nazis, and they start cracking down on the Jewish people, and they start rounding them up for the concentration camps. And your Jewish friend comes to you and says, please, 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 let me hide in your attic. I really don't want to go to these concentration camps. And of course, you say yes, because you operate off of the maxim, never harm other people. And you know that your Jewish friend would be harmed by going to this concentration camp. So you let them hide in your attic. Now, a couple days go by. All of a sudden, your Nazi friend comes knocking at the door, and they ask, are you hiding any Jews? Now, you also operate off of the maxim, never lie to your friends. What are you supposed to do in this situation? According to Kant, I'm not sure what you're supposed to do. And that's what I want to hear from you. What do you think Kant would do in this situation where we have two competing maxims? Never lie to your friends, never harm your friends. You got a Jewish friend in your attic and you got a Nazi friend at your door. Going purely from Kant's ethical framework, going purely from the deontologist point of view, what do you do? Do you lie to the Nazi and tell him that you do not have any Jewish people in your attic? Or do you tell the Nazi the truth and in turn harm your Jewish friend when they get dragged out of your house? So that's going to be the discussion question. And I'm interested to see what you guys think Kant would say. And again, I'm not asking you what you would do. I'm asking you to put your little deontology hats on, act like Kant would, and write a well-reasoned couple, like a paragraph long of what you would do. What would Kant do in this situation? Not what would you do, what would Kant do given his dependence and his reliance on these maxims, these universalizable categorical imperatives. All right, that's it for this week. Looking forward to hearing those responses. Looking forward to reading your writing assignments. So get to work on that. I know you still have some time, but you know, it's better to start early, get a really, it's called like a shitty first draft done, and then edit that for the remainder of the time you have left. So if you cram it all in the night before, you won't get that shitty first draft, or you will get that shitty first draft and then you turn it into me and then I have to read your shitty first draft. So it's better to write a shitty first draft a couple weeks ahead of time, put it away, sleep on it for a couple days, pull it out again, check out what's going on with it, make some edits, put it away, back and forth. You know, that editing process. I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you that this is what you should be doing, but I know a lot of you will try to do this at the last minute. And 9 times out of 10, I know those students. I know those papers. I can tell immediately when someone has not worked that hard on this assignment. I mean, it's 1 page, so it should not take you that long. But anyways, get to work on those. And yeah, I'll be reaching out via email and other forms of communication.